Anne or Beast? In order to prove to Hop Pop that he's more responsible than his baby sister Poppy, Sprig heads into the woods to investigate rumors of a monster lurking there, who's been attacking the townsfolk. He's quickly caught in a trap by a human girl named Anne, though when a real monster roars nearby, Anne frees Sprig, which convinces him she isn't so bad. But the rest of the townsfolk, gathered into an angry mob by Mayor Toadstool, catch this duo with the human before they also meet the real monster, a giant mantis. In an inversion of the earlier situation, Sprig frees Anne, and she proceeds to defend him against the mantis as the two tie it up together. Sprig also defends Anne against the angry mob, who agree to allow this monster to stay with the Plantar family. Anne settles down in their basement as she pleads with a chest from the opening theme to return her home, to no success. Best Fronds. Starting with a flashback to Anne stealing the chest from the opening title, the episode then begins on Sprig comforting Anne in her basement room as the rest of the family is slowly convinced she isn't a monster. But as the rest of the townsfolk may not see it this way, Hop Pop puts them on lockdown and orders Anne and Sprig to play inside. Anne convinces Sprig to take advantage of his sleeping to steal the house key and go to the lake, claiming that that's what friends do, enable each other. Once at the lake, they ignore a "don't swim" sign to enjoy themselves before a giant snake emerges from the water, threatening to eat them. As Anne is a weak swimmer, she insists that Sprig leave her behind, but he doubles back and allows the snake to eat him. Anne doesn't get many time to warn him before the snake spits him out because he kept a few of Hop Pop's peppers on him, too spicy for the monster to handle, before these new friends return home, acting as though they never left. The end of the episode shows an imprisoned Sasha being interrogated by a figure over Anne's missing shoe, proof there must be more people like her around. The decision to start the show not from the main character's point of view, but from that of a character more familiar with the setting is an interesting one, but one that's justified in the second half of this episode, as we start to see the flaws with Anne's character. She is easily pressured into committing some petty theft by her friends, then she pressures Sprig into misbehaving so they can have fun instead of doing something more sensible. Anne's first foray into society did see her attacked by an angry mob after all. Generally, you want a story to begin with a likable character whose journey you want to follow and whose goals you can root for. But this goes contrary to character development, where the audience watches a flawed character work through these flaws to become a better person. So Anne might be the main character, but since Sprig is more immediately likable, we focus on his wants and his family first. This, in turn, makes Anne feel like more of an outsider, as she's introduced as a new quantity in the world, rather than Amphibia being seen from the point of view of an outsider. Cane Crazy. Anne insults Hop Pop's cooking, who reacts by threatening to kick her out. While doing an impression of the old man, she accidentally breaks his heirloom cane, and, worried she might really be kicked out, she recruits the others in repairing it. So they ask a woodworker, Leopold Loggle, if he can fix it, and he can not fix it, though he does point them to a doom tree where they can find the wood for a replacement cane. Anne takes a picture of his map on her phone and they head out, finding this tree and removing a branch, only for the tree to be revealed as a giant stick bug that chases them back to the shop. The doom tree wrecks up the place for a while until Anne throws a jar of termites who eat it down to a squishy form. Leopold ends up taking both the cane and Anne's old clicky pen as payment for the damages to his store, and they return home empty-handed. But Hop Pop doesn't actually kick Anne out, saying it was just a bluff to make her respect him more, and that she reminds him of himself at her age. Flood, Sweat, and Tears. A leak in the basement floods Anne's bedroom, so she and Sprig decide to become roommates despite Hop Pop's warnings that it might strain their friendship. They ignore this warning and proceed to have fun staying up at night with pillow fights and would-you-rather questions, though each of their habits starts to wear out the other one. They disagree on the temperature and humidity, because frogs can't sweat. They disagree on how much sleep to get, as Anne stays up too late. And they disagree on whether Sprig's figurines are dolls or action figures. Eventually, they're both fed up with one another, so they head to the basement to search for and fix the leak, finding two giant lampreys instead. Anne and Sprig are pulled underwater before seeing Anne's old bed float by, where they work together to defeat the river monsters with a pillow fight. These monsters flee, and Hop Pop investigates the noise, hearing the two discussing each other's flaws before he points out that the two actually discussing their issues is what makes good friends. Not that they can get along without any issues. The conflicts in these episodes come down to arguments Anne is having with the Plantar family, things that are an inevitability when it comes to spending a long amount of time with anyone, family or not. And while the Plantars aren't technically Anne's family, it's clear that this isn't going to be a major focus in the near future as the found family trope comes into play. We're 3 episodes in and they're already bickering like a father and child. Also fighting are Anne and Sprig, who are basically siblings at this point, as they both feed into one another's feedback loops of misbehavior. They assume staying up all night and playing around will be fun, but one of the two still needs to be the responsible one, and the distance they occasionally feel is vital to this continued coexistence. Being friends with somebody and being family with somebody are 2 different things, and Anne is, at this point, not really either one, which can have both its strengths and weaknesses. An episode back, there was a scene that recreated a shot from the opening theme, one where we see a friend of Anne's captured as a prisoner in a castle. Anne's journey of wanting to make it home is something she cannot do because there's bad weather or something like that, blocking anyone from coming or going, which feels like a plot device to force her to stay put, while allowing for the writers to focus on world building and character introductions without a sense of tonal whiplash, where it feels like Anne doesn't actually want anything anymore because she's forgotten her motivations, rather than the girl making the best of her time during a bad situation. Hop Luck. The Plantars are planning for the annual Wartwood potluck, trying to make a dish that won't get in last place, where they'll be placed into the shame cage once again. Anne convinces them to ignore their old family recipe book to make something more modern, a pizza. Pizza ingredients are hard to come by in Amphibia, and they wind up promising Sprig's hand in marriage to the baker's daughter, wrangling caterpillars for cheese, and attempting to retrieve tomatoes from giant carnivorous tomato plants. These plants end up eating the family, with the ingredients being digested as they're stuck in the monster's throat. But at Anne's suggestion, she asks for a traditional way to escape, where they learn the entire plant's neck is edible. After eating their way out, they realize the potluck is about to happen, so they submit one of Hop Pop's traditional dishes, garnished with a bit of tomato. This winds up being the best dish they've ever submitted. It still gets last place though, and Anne is happy to join them in the shame cage. Stakeout. Sprig steals the family's corn to set up a fake stakeout for Anne and Hop Pop to get them to stop arguing about Anne's home and Hop Pop's nostalgia. This plan works to get them to sympathize for a bit before they start trying to one-up one another again, eventually showing off drinks to keep them awake that they swap when arguing they're too intense for the other one. So Sprig decides to steal more corn to force them to stay out a second night, though the hallucinating Anne and Hop Pop catch him in the act and begin blasting him with lasers. Imaginary lasers. When these don't work, the duo tries attacking the corn thief with weapons, chasing Sprig to the house where his pleading finally has them realize his identity. Hop Pop and Anne both realize that they were defending each other during the attack, and they learn to respect one another before falling asleep. So a bit of irony I've picked up on is that Anne wants to go back home and Hop Pop wants the exact same thing. The only difference between the two characters is what they define as back home, as Hop Pop is far closer physically, but far less likely to get what he wants due to the passage of time being what separates him, rather than some sort of magic box. In some ways, this conflict manifests itself as a cultural exchange. Anne teaches the Plantar family about pizza, a human delicacy, or Anne trades weird drinks with Hop Pop while the two are on a stakeout, once again getting to try something of the others' and learning a little bit not only about their taste, but the context behind that taste. When Anne starts tripping, she, lampshaded and out of character, points out that her unique physiology has caused an unusual reaction from the gourd Hop Pop had with them. She is grossed out by their food even though no one else has a problem with it. A human girl in a frog's world does raise a series of understandable conflicts about the basic differences between not only their cultures, but physical bodies. Although, the citizens of Amphibia have sort of a crazy frog thing going on, so the differences are only as extensive as is necessary to make the plots more interesting. I realize maybe Crazy Frog is a bit too old of a reference for some of my viewers. If you don't know what Crazy Frog is, look it up right now. Seriously, pause this video and open up a new tab and look it up, and when you get back, you'll have a new counter-argument every time someone says that culture used to be better. Just compare this show about frogs to the millennial viral frog thing, and enjoy how good you have it. Additionally, for context of how much spoilers I kind of know going forward, when Anne's hair turns blue during this episode, I kind of know what that's foreshadowing. Or rather, I know that is foreshadowing something. The Domino Effect. Anne finds and rescues a caterpillar who resembles her cat Domino from back home and names it Domino 2. She and Sprig have to keep this pet a secret from Hop Pop, who's still upset about their last pet, Charlie Big Bottom, and the fact that he was the one who had to clean up after it. Over the next day, Domino 2 proceeds to tear up the house and leave scratches all over Anne's face, which she tolerates by saying the caterpillar just has to spend some more time adjusting. Later, the caterpillar undergoes metamorphosis and becomes a giant kill-a-moth, toying with the frogs and preparing to eat them. Anne lures Domino 2 away with its old toy and gets chased to a cliff, throwing the toy away as the moth chases after. When she returns home to apologize for nearly getting the planters eaten, Hop Pop admits he understands how Anne felt because he misses Charlie Big Bottom. Taking charge. Anne introduces the planters to Suspicion Island, a show she has on her phone that they all spend the next day binge-watching. But the next morning, Anne discovers that her phone's battery is dead as someone stayed up all night watching every episode. They start to grow suspicious of one another, though Anne just wants to recharge her phone, something Hop Pop says they can do by finding a Zapapede in the mountains. They head out, wary of who might have used up Anne's battery along the way, and accusing each other of having done it, their fight breaking a bridge and causing them to plummet. Eventually, Hop Pop confesses that it was him, despite claiming to have hated the show, and he makes up for it by diving into a nest of Zapapedes and getting electrocuted. The others have to work together to save him, getting shocked themselves and blasting off into the sky. Anne's phone ends up charged to 10,000%, and they all agree to stop fighting to watch the rest of Suspicion Island together. Did Anne ever eat Hop Pop's hot chips? If so, now that she's charged her phone, she's basically hit all the hot girl summer tropes. More seriously, Anne's phone holding a charge for a suspiciously long number of episodes was something that was addressed here, being the thing that tied her to her old memories. So having it boosted to well over 100% of its max charge is kind of a hand-wavy way of saying to the audience not to ask questions if the answer to the question is boring. The appeal of Amphibia comes from the fish-out-of-water dynamics of its characters, with Anne's modern tech and human values against the rural amphibian lifestyle of her new family. I'm not doing like a frog-out-of-water pun, that's too low-hanging. And as much as Anne is starting to find some of her old joys in the world of Amphibia, such as small creatures who resemble her old pets, the planters are able to find joys in binge-watching television from her world. Each ideal can learn from those around them as they change their tastes to adapt to what their loved ones like to do. This doesn't always turn out great. Maybe the fuzzy caterpillar's a horrifying frog-eating monster, and maybe the basement flooding doesn't actually lead to a weeks-long sleepover. But ultimately, these problems are solved the same way any other problem is solved, with a little bit of communication. Not getting along with your siblings, or somebody watching ahead on a TV show, are both such mundane problems that can exist as plots alongside hallucinating from gourd tea, or being chased by a tree monster. Anne Theft Auto. Anne wants to take Bessie, the planter's giant snail, out for a drive, but Hop Pop insists that she read the manual on Bessie's history first. She ignores this to go off-roading with Sprig instead, though they wind up stranded in the woods, with Bessie refusing to leave her shell. Sprig seeks help, getting a slow ride from Miss Croaker, who he had previously met in a road rage incident, as Anne stays behind, eventually reading through the manual because she has nothing else to do. She winds up getting invested in this story, learning several chapters in that Bessie hides in her shell when predators are nearby, and how to coax her back out to escape. She and Sprig make it home, where Anne reveals she's read the whole book, but she rejects Hop Pop's offer to get some proper experience. Breakout star. Anne has an acne breakout and wants to hide her face, though Hop Pop makes her work the family's market stand anyway. Once her acne is revealed to the town of Wartwood, the frogs there think she's covered in warts, and Anne is quickly made famous for that. Mayor Toadstool, down in the polls, sees this popularity and bribes Anne to support him publicly with a lavish apartment and snail rides, with Anne quickly forgetting about the planters. But the next day her acne is clear, and Anne has to ask the planters for help to fake pimples with swamp berries. She makes it to an assembly where Toadstool requests that she disavow her old family, as they're a bad look for her, and Anne reacts by coming clean, literally cleaning off her face. Mayor Toadstool is chased off as Anne decides to let the planters enjoy her nice things before the locks are changed. Anne finally gets access to the family car equivalent, and like anyone growing up in a rural area knows, this means she finally gets to participate in society because she can at last travel freely. This also marks a minor shift in the narrative, as more and more of Wartwood gets introduced beyond an incarnation as faces of an angry mob. And what better way to start this series of introductions than with Bessie, who has been here the whole time. Rather than viewing Bessie as a method of transportation, Anne starts to view her as a living creature, which makes sense as she's talking to anthropomorphic frogs who can understand her, so it's not as if showing a bit of affection towards a large snail is a pointless endeavor. The following episode then has Anne leave the house while not attracting the usual negative attention she is used to. Once she starts breaking out, the other frogs start to believe she's covered in warts, and, being frogs, this makes her enough like them to finally start to shower her with praise. This big jump in how she is treated goes straight to her head, in a plot that's pretty typical for a kid's show. It's better to use a more familiar plotline when making a large number of character introductions at once. Mayor Toadstool is a character who's been foreshadowed in signs around Wartwood before, as well as having led the mob against her in the first episode. I like that his toady is literally named Toady. That's a neat detail. I've also realized he is a toad, while most of the rest of Wartwood is frogs. I tried to see if there was any other indicator to tell frogs and toads apart in universe without looking things up and risking a bunch of spoilers, but I only found the phrase, "not all frogs are toads, but all toads are frogs," which only added to my confusion as to whether there's some sort of racial allegory at play here. I might just be looking too far into a lack of toad puns, though. Sprig versus Hop Pop. When Sprig finds out his suggestions for the farm are being burned, he challenges Hop Pop to a sumo match for ownership of the farm. To everybody's surprise, Sprig wins, and he immediately starts incorporating Anne and Polly's suggestions into the workplace, but they quickly run out of food and other things begin falling apart, prompting Anne to go behind Sprig's back to search for Hop Pop for help. Hop Pop has been living with a group of beetles in the cemetery after helping a beetle named Jeremy, though he agrees to return when he finds out Sprig's been using his bed. During the rematch, Hop Pop tells Sprig that he's learned the value of coordination from the beetles, and Sprig voluntarily surrenders, returning ownership to Hop Pop, who now reads the suggestions before burning them. Girl time. While observing Polly playing along with the planters' disgusting spitting habits, Anne decides to take her out for some girl time. She takes Hop Pop's wallet and heads to a spa, a salon, and a clothing store, before ending up at a tea shop, though Polly still shows some resistance to doing feminine things. So at the advice of Felicia, they go to a massage parlor, where the masseuse/bounty hunter working there gives Anne a full-body massage. But Polly sneaks out to spit with the local vagrant, and Anne finally tells her off for being gross. Meanwhile, the rest of the town has arrested the planters because of Anne spending the fake IOUs from Hop Pop's wallet, and they're forced to do manual labor to pay the town back. But seeing a golden spitting trophy in the middle of town, Anne gets the idea to have Polly beat the spitting record to win this trophy. She fails at first because she feels self-conscious about Anne's rant from before, but after Anne apologizes, Polly is able to beat the old record, and the planters use the trophy to pay off their debt. Polly feels like less of a character and more of a collection of one-liners thus far. She doesn't really have the same familial dynamics of Sprig and Anne, or of Hop Pop and Anne, and she doesn't feel nearly as fleshed out as other characters, hardly contributing to plots thus far. So having Anne attempt to spend some girl time with her is a way to turn a less developed character into someone with more of a connection to the ongoing dynamics. I mean, it's a little bit weird we got an episode fleshing out Bessie before Polly, but I digress. Eventually it's better than never. Polly herself is then established in relation to the other characters around her, being the only girl of the Plantar family and picking up several of the less feminine habits that her brother has. Anne was shown early on to be close to two other girls, in Marcy and Sasha, so being thrust into a world of frogs is also her being thrust into a world of men. But the episode also goes out of its way to point out the flaws in that logic. She's not in a world of men or women, but frogs. People like some things, and they dislike others, and a person's froggy gender doesn't really play into it very much. Actually, now that I think of it, do amphibians even have sexual diversions in the tadpole stage? A cursory lookup doesn't even seem to indicate that they do, and external features don't really occur until after the tadpole stage, so especially for frogs like Polly, there is no difference physical or social. I don't want to spoil too much for myself, so my research at this stage of writing the script is looking up stuff on real frogs. Dating season. Sprig is attacked in the woods by a childhood friend, Ivy, and Anne starts to suspect he has a crush on her. When she tells Hop Pop, he prepares a courtship ritual for the two, getting Ivy's mother Felicia to go along with this arrangement by offering Sprig as labor for her shop, while Hop Pop gets some proprietary seeds. At the Firefly Festival, the two awkwardly make small talk before learning they're only there at their family's behest, and they leave to go watch the fireflies together. Anne believes this is a good sign, as per her magazines, but Hop Pop and Felicia leave to force the couple to come back and finish this ceremony. But they're grabbed by carnivorous love doves before they can reach the others, so Ivy and Sprig team up together to rescue them with an ambush, the same kind of ambush Ivy had been doing to Sprig since the start of the episode. Once freed, the adults realize it was unfair to pressure their children, as Sprig agrees he's developed real feelings for Ivy. Anne vs. Wild. The Plantars leave without Anne for a camping trip, though she insists they bring her along in spite of her dislike of camping, because she doesn't want to be left out. They arrive at Flemington Campgrounds, where Anne repeatedly fails at anything outdoorsy, but instead of admitting she is having a bad time, she doubles down and asks for a more intense experience. A frog named Soggy Joe bursts out of a bush and offers to take them to a more dangerous campsite, leading Anne, who leads the family, to a secluded spot in the woods, where he tells them all about frog-eating mudmen. He's then hit from behind with an axe, collapsing as the mudmen surround the Plantars. They try to fight back with torches, light being one of their weaknesses, but this doesn't work, so Anne uses a bath bomb from her bag, cleanliness being their other weakness. This reveals the mudmen as regular frogs, and they slink into the night. Anne admits she was lying about her love of the outdoors, and they agree to invite her to places in the future even if she doesn't want to go. When the Plantars arrive home, Anne finally gathers them to show off the thing that brought her to that world, unveiling the music box she stole before. Hopadiah returns to his study, where he looks up this box and discovers it is the Calamity Box, which was presumed destroyed. The first part started to introduce a bit of shipping discourse to the show, openly referencing not only earlier episodes like Hop Luck, where Sprig was engaged, but also having Anne use exact terms and theory-crafting couple names for Sprig and Ivy. I can see episode titles in advance, and I see Sprivy down there, and I'm just now piecing together that that probably is Sprivy and, doesn't rhyme with privy. Anyway, shipping discourse is typically something that I never really bothered to engage in fandoms, even in series that I have become obsessed with. Even in franchises like Fire Emblem, where that sort of thing is actively encouraged, I still tend to go with whatever happens naturally. So I'm not going to include a whole section on shipping and the potential around that, because I'm not a guy who's qualified to do that. I am, however, qualified to talk about the fact that Anne finally accepts she's never going to be one of the Plantars, at least not in the physical sense. Frogs and humans are too different, and as much as she tries to fake otherwise, she just doesn't like the outdoors the way they do, eating bugs and being covered in mud and so on. But the moral at the end of the episode is that she doesn't have to be exactly like them to be liked and accepted. They can still respect a human even if she's not a frog. And it is this acceptance regardless of context that finally makes her comfortable enough to show off the Calamity Box, and to formally recruit their help in researching a way to get back home, something she can do now that she has a home. Contagi-Anne. Anne fakes an illness to stay inside on a rainy day, with the planters working outdoor and then returning ill. Anne attempts to take care of them while still trying to fake that she is sick, managing their symptoms and cooking for them. But Hop Pop starts to turn red, with his medical book saying it's a disease called red leg, that's fatal unless they can soak in a particular mineral spring. So Anne gathers them up on Bessie and rides to a mountain, eventually carting them up herself when Bessie's too slow. Despite struggling with the stairs being made for frogs, they eventually make it to the peak, only for the water to have no effect. Anne breaks down and admits she faked her illness, only for Hop Pop to check his book again and realize that a mushroom Anne included in her soup had merely dyed their skin red. Family Shrub. Hop Pop is working on the family shrub, like a family tree, but isn't keeping the kids' interest, least of all Anne, who's not even a planter. Hop Pop leaves to get more glue for their crafts, ending up at a store where he winds up knocking down the display and then getting covered in glue, as well as covered in local. While he's gone, Sprig accidentally discovers a hidden passageway in the house that leads to a laboratory, where they get chased by a giant pumpkin, an armory where they have to fight through a gauntlet, and a storage room full of games gathered by Emma the Newt, who was an honorary planter despite not being related. When Hop Pop returns from his glue gathering, he finds that the others are now fascinated by their family history, including Anne, the other honorary planter. Anne, forgetting the previous episode, declares herself uninterested in the planter family's history due to not being one of them, citing a lack of a blood relation as her reason for not going along with their history lesson. But another part of her reasoning is that she has little interest in learning about a bunch of farmers doing farmer stuff. Funnily enough, this is the same reason that Sprig and Polly don't care either. They're bored by their own history, making Anne's disinterest in the subject something that makes her fit in even better. Also making her fit in is the fact that, once underground, the trio of kids finds 3 rooms, each of which requires their particular skills. Sprig is able to tame the giant pumpkin by showing it a bit of affection so it lowers its guard enough to be kicked away. Polly is able to clear the obstacle course by charging in violently like she always does. And Anne uses her video game knowledge to clear the puzzles collected by a newt who was unrelated to the rest of the family, again, only by blood. The sick plot has Anne avoiding responsibility by lying about her condition, only for this lie to get bigger and bigger as she tries to help the others, eventually forgetting to fake that she's ill. This is a common enough plot in sitcoms and the like that one would expect the next logical step to be taken of the family getting mad at her for lying and Anne having to earn their trust back. But instead, she earns their trust during the lie, by acting in a way that would have been selfless even if she was in perfect health. It's an inversion of typical tropes that only works if the family actually likes each other, a statement that the planters have earned. Lily Pad Tie. After destroying the family's pizza, the planters go to Stumpy's diner to eat instead, where they see an obnoxious food critic named Albus Duckweed, who threatens to shut the place down with a bad review. But because Anne has worked in food service before, she's convinced she can turn Stumpy's around, and she helps the restaurant owner clean up the place and revamp the menu. Wartwood is impressed at the new vibe to the diner, except for Duckweed, who's still intent on writing his bad review. So Anne and Stumpy work together to make a Kraken dish that will wow him, but this Kraken ends up attacking the restaurant instead, with the duo having to fight it into submission. Despite the fight, Duckweed enjoyed his experience and gives Stumpy's a positive review on the message board, a literal board. Planter's Last Stand. After the mayor implements a tax hike, the planters have to get creative to save their stand at the farmer's market. Anne uses the remains of a gourd to create Plantar's potion, then convinces Hop Pop to embellish the effects of the potion to sell it to Wartwood. Because the Plantars have a reputation for being honest, the townsfolk believe him, and the potions sell well, until they run out of ingredients, and Hop Pop resorts to using compost and garbage to make new batches. These batches sell on the popularity of the previous day's sales until Miss Croaker, their most loyal customer, decides to buy a bottle. The guilt gets to Hop Pop and he slaps the bottle out of her hand, admitting his fault, though giant flies grab the kids and carry them away before he can rightfully apologize. Hop Pop lures the flies away by rolling the barrel off a cliff, and he saves the day, returning the money he scammed from Wartwood, only to lose his stand immediately afterwards. The family tries to stay positive, though Hop Pop realizes he's unemployed. Anne reveals hidden depths in her ability to run and maintain a restaurant based on her experience working with her parents. Hop Pop reveals he has hidden depths in his ability to use a bit of showmanship to sell a product, though the similarities between these two parts end there, as Anne's attempts to save Stumpies are successful, while Hop Pop's were more successful, though not treated as such by the narrative. In Wartwood, there's a value placed on honesty because it's a small town. By this point, the miscellaneous background characters can be quickly identified either as such or by name. To rip off a stranger before skipping town is one thing, but to know the name of the person you're profiting off of changes the dynamics a bit to where even greed loses out against familiarity. But it's not as though greed was a major reason for the dynamics in these two episodes. Anne was just helping a diner's owner to keep his store open, while Hop Pop just wanted to keep the family business afloat. The only reason these plots were started was because an outside force placed pressure onto the business owners, and while Anne helping out a restaurant was selfishly motivated, she just wanted to stick it to a skinny alien from Lilo and Stitch, the end result was good all around, and it gets a pass. Hop Pop, in the same sense, was also motivated by a good reason, and merely took it too far. Toad tax. Anne still hasn't received any respect from Wartwood, so when a group of toads arrive to work as debt collectors, she joins up with them with the hope of earning a bit of respect by being deputized. The toads then produce a list provided by the mayor, a list of tax cheats, with these toads ransacking multiple houses to pay for the missing money. But Anne is confused as she's confident these frogs have paid their taxes, sneaking a few personal effects out of the tax heap to return to the citizens of Wartwood. Once the toads reach the Plantar family farm, she finally stands up to them, saying she knows for sure that they've paid their dues, and siding against the tax collectors. The toads prepare to attack her for betraying them, but the townsfolk rally behind Anne, defending her and scaring off these toads. Meanwhile, Sprig has been following the mayor's suspicious activity, discovering that he's been keeping the collected tax revenue inside of a statue, then lying that the townsfolk didn't pay. The toads collect their taxes from Toadstool, and Anne is treated as a hero by Wartwood. Prison Break. Captain Grime is struggling to get his soldiers in functioning order as they lack discipline to maintain their fort. He's also struggling with the imprisoned Sasha, who keeps manipulating the guards watching her cell into quitting. He's about to interrogate her when the tower is attacked by two giant herons, attracted by a recently retired toad's noise. They begin to attack the tower, with the toads retreating underground as Sasha works with Grime to injure one of the birds. He tries to rally the troops into a counterattack, but they're too scared to fight, so Sasha recommends using positive reinforcement to convince the soldiers that they're valuable, complimenting a few and telling Grime to compliment them too. This works, and the soldiers launch their attack, driving away the birds and showing a much larger degree of loyalty and unity during the fight. As Grime is impressed with Sasha, he agrees to allow her provisions and the ability to go free, but he also points to the herons as proof that the outside world isn't safe enough to travel alone. Sasha agrees to stay and serve as his lieutenant instead, promising her friends she'll still look for them. I'm aware that if Amphibia were to be an episodic show for the rest of its runtime, people wouldn't give it the amount of praise it receives, to the point that it would be on my radar to be recommended for a review. So knowing this, I was aware that eventually Amphibia would need to start reintroducing plot elements back into the series. The smartest way to do this is by introducing and reintroducing these elements slowly. Episode 2 has a warning that not everyone has had the same experience in Amphibia as Anne, and this episode is a reminder that the idyllic countryside town of Wartwood doesn't reflect all of Amphibia. Or is the countryside really so idyllic? The Plantar family was quick to accept Anne as one of their own, yet after months of living there, people in Wart would still view Anne as an outsider. On the other hand, Sasha fit in well with the Toads, almost too well, as they began to respect her more than their actual leadership. She's able to manipulate them into doing her bidding in much the same way as we saw her pressuring Anne to steal the Calamity Box at the start of the show. So both of these girls were able to thrive, just at different times, as Sasha had to wait a bit longer to get the chance, while Anne got several chances and never really got the acceptance she wanted until she stopped caring about it, both in joining with the tax-collecting Toads, and later by returning the pilfered goods, despite knowing the people she was helping out wouldn't have done the same for her. Grubhog Day. It's Grubhog Day, which is basically an excuse for a big fair. Hop Pop tells Sprig that he's been volunteered for the position to watch over the Grubhog before the main event. Sprig agrees, as this is the most recent chance a Plantar has had to watch over the Grubhog since a relative messed it up years ago. Though what he really wanted to do was go on all the rides, so Anne compromises by convincing him to take the Grubhog along on rides in secret, meaning he can do both. But when the Grubhog falls out of a roller coaster and is snatched by a giant bird, Anne and Sprig have to come up with a replacement so Sprig doesn't get in trouble. They make a puppet, and Anne's puppeteering is enjoyed by the crowd, until the ceremony's about to finish, where they plan to kill the Grubhog, meaning they'll cut open Anne's hand. Sprig comes clean about the deception, and Hop Pop forgives him as he realizes he placed too much pressure on his son. In the end, Anne and Sprig find new purpose in performing their puppet show for different crowds. Hop, Pop, and Luck. While selling produce in an alley, Hop Pop meets with Sylvia, a woman he had a crush on years ago, though he was never able to admit this crush due to his rival Monroe always stealing attention. Since Hop Pop is too nervous to confess to Sylvia directly, he tries to show her his feelings at an upcoming dance. But since he can't dance, he asks Anne to teach him how. She shows him a few basic dance moves over a training montage, and Hop Pop is finally confident enough to ask for a dance, only for Monroe to ask Sylvia first. So Hop Pop challenges him to a dance-off, showing off the new moves he has, only for Monroe to beat him easily. Refusing to give up, Hop Pop decides instead to freestyle some moves, a series of bizarre movements, and these horrify the gathered audience. Except for Sylvia herself, who confesses that she always liked the weird ones, and she and Hop Pop dance together on the now empty dance floor. Since his very first introduction, Sprig has struggled with taking responsibility for himself and putting other people above his own immediate wants. And while there have been a few episodes thus far about him learning his lesson, only to immediately forget it, there's still a bit of a shift in how this lesson is approached time and time again. Here, Sprig at least tries to go along with the role he's given, watching the Grubhog, only playing on the roller coasters because he is convinced he can multitask. It's not that he's abandoning his responsibilities so much as he's prioritizing them less than he ought to. It's character growth, if only by a small amount. Hop Pop gets humanized a bit in this episode, maybe a bad choice of words, as he reveals that he's in love with another frog, just too nervous to do or say anything about it. He turns to Anne for help, not only because she is a good dancer, but because she helped out Sprig when he had a similar plot, even though her help didn't turn out for the best. Since they both supposedly learned a lesson from that experience, she is still the right teacher for expressing himself, except for when she's not. Anne tries to teach Hop Pop not to act weird with freestyle dancing, when this is the exact thing that actually made Sylvia fall in love with him. It's not as though a dance contest is going to change a person's taste after all. Civil Wart. Wartwood gathers for a theater night, only for the troupe to have been eaten on the way over. So Anne plays a movie on her phone instead, a young adult flick where a girl has to choose between two supernatural boys, Hunter and Alistair. When the movie ends on a cliffhanger, the town splits between the two options, with Sprig and Polly leading each side, while refusing reconciliation as a mirror for their own sibling conflicts. When this conflict escalates into a literal division of the town, Anne and Hop Pop attempt to get them talking. This fails, so they force a confrontation by taking each side's flag and meeting in the middle. But this meeting only erupts in fruit throwing, with Polly eventually cornered after an ambush. But when Sprig sees his side about to pelt his sister with fruit, he dives in the way and takes the hits for her, saying it's what older brothers do. After this, the town drops their fruit and returns to their normal lives, with Hop Pop saying that they do something like this about once a year. Hop Popular. Hop Pop is stewing in misery at the loss of his market stand, applying for new jobs where he can, before overhearing that the mayoral election is coming up. When complaining about Toadstool, people start to rally behind him, and soon Hop Pop finds himself in the running. The rest of the planters are unsure about this, knowing he'd be devastated if he loses, but he'd be happy to win, and they help him with his campaigning, most of which involves riding giant beetles, feeding giant birds, and surviving in the woods, something Hop Pop does with the help of Jeremy. Before the final match, a boxing match, Toadstool tries to convince Hop Pop to throw the fight in exchange for having his market stand back, an offer that he tells to his family that he's considering. But when the fight actually begins and he sees the people rallying behind him, Hop Pop refuses to lose on purpose, winning with a knockout the night before the election. Hop Pop gets the entire town of Wartwood to vote for him, though the toads outside of Wartwood all vote for the incumbent, and Toadstool remains in charge. But Hop Pop is glad that he stood up for himself, with the episode having a happy ending as the other people in the market all pitch in to pay for his stand. Anne is an outcast among the people of Wartwood, but as the episodes go on, it starts to become clear that the rest of the Plantar family are outcasts too. It's to the point that pulling a planter is the phrase for a huge mistake. So some sort of monster visiting the town would, of course, become the responsibility of the other outcasts of the village, as they stick together because they have to, as much as the fact that they want to. Sprig never had friends growing up. Hop Pop was always one-upped by others. The outsider family adopts the outsider human, and they proceed to stick together because they understand what it's like to not be able to do just that. But when tribalism takes over the village, people put aside their previous difference with the Plantar family to go against people with whom they have less in common. Polly and Sprig actually being able to maintain pseudo-armies of other frogs to defend ideas about which character in a fictional work is better. Hop Pop is also able to find some sort of romance with Sylvia when he acts like himself, the weirdo outsider, as Sylvia sympathizes with the weirdo outsiders of the world, revealing herself as being one too when they dance together. But maybe Sylvia isn't the only one to secretly consider herself as different, like the Plantars. When Hop Pop runs for mayor, he runs on the idea that the toads who have made it in society are mistreating the regular folks, and they quickly swarm to his side in this regard, as they understand they have more in common with him than they do with high society. When it comes to injustice and inequality, the only way things get close to fair is when people with things in common recognize their similarities more than their differences. Croak and Punishment. Sprig finds a blue moon shell that he wants to give to Ivy for her birthday, which he leaves on the fence while the planters do their daily work. When they return, Anne and Sprig find the shell is missing, and Anne teaches Sprig how to do the good cop bad cop routine to help them interrogate the citizens of Wartwood so they can find it. Sprig enters people's houses, smashing up the place and accusing them of theft before eliminating enough suspects that only one frog is left, a new guy named Gunther. But Sprig's bad cop routine of smashing up his house causes this frog to fly into a rage, chasing them into Wartwood, where the citizens refuse to allow him and Anne to hide in their houses. Sprig's only able to stop the chase by apologizing and running off anyway. The two make it home where Sprig sees Ivy holding the blue moon shell, saying she saw it on the fence and took it off to be cleaned. Sprig offers her the shell, but she lets him keep it to keep on the house's door so she can see it whenever she's close. Trip to the Archives. There's only 1 week until the mountain pass clears up, so Hop Pop takes the family to the archives so they can research life outside the valley to prepare for the trip. While the rest of the family's reading, Sprig tries to get them to dive straight into an adventure instead of reading about other people's adventures, eventually stealing a lens from the sunlight-powered door to trap them inside. The planters are upset with him, especially when he drops it and they're really trapped. After a few failed escape attempts, Anne tries to leave through the sunroof but is trapped and swarmed by grazing cicadas. Remembering that the archives used to be a man's house, Sprig has to read about the archive's history to learn about its pipe system and find an escape, returning to the sunroof to save Anne, with Hop Pop and Polly following. Wartwood is a society where everybody trusts each other, a place where you can leave things out without worrying that anyone will steal them. But when Anne starts to point suspicion towards imaginary people, she convinces Sprig that everything he knows about his own community is wrong, and people really are out there willing to do terrible things. Had he taken his mentality from the beginning of the episode with them through the rest of it, he would have easily been able to find out who recently took a shell to be polished, as he would have assumed that the thief had a good motivation, and they would have gone to a rock/shell expert first. But Anne convinced him not to trust his neighbors, and then his neighbors became untrustworthy. They were willing to let him into their houses before for the interrogation, but once he began to treat them like suspects by default, they started to act like it. When you treat people with suspicion, don't be surprised if they treat you the same way. And then once again, Sprig ends up getting himself and the others in trouble because he does not take things as seriously as he ought to, more or less the same plot Sprig always finds himself on this side of. What's different is the fact that Anne is not the one playing into his fantasies and enabling him, as she takes her potential route home seriously. Normally, Anne is the one who encourages and plays along with Sprig's adventures, but here she's siding with Hop Pop that he ought to be more down to earth. Snow Day. Hyber Day is coming up, a day where all the frogs are frozen in place for one day, and a day that the frogs are nervous about because once a year, one of them disappears. But because Anne is warm-blooded, she volunteers to protect the town from this disappearance as they're frozen, which happens quickly. She drags all the frogs to the middle of Wartwood and starts keeping watch, but when she gets bored, she decides to thaw Sprig. Anne and a sleepy Sprig proceed to play around with the frozen bodies until noticing that Polly is gone. Sprig tracks her to a cave, and while trying to retrieve her, they're attacked by a giant weasel. While fighting this giant, Anne notices that the weasel has children it's trying to feed, and that if they take Polly, she'll condemn the babies to starvation. So she offers some of her breakfast from the start of the episode to the monster, and it accepts the food, with Polly being returned to the middle of town. While the townsfolk are praising Anne for a year without a disappearance, she confesses that she goofed around too much on the job, though the townsfolk don't really mind, until Sprig shows off all the pictures they took. Cracking Miss Croaker. Sprig is upset because everybody in town seems to like him except for Miss Sadie Croaker, who barely pays him any attention. In spite of Anne's advice to let her ignore him, Sprig breaks into her house to search for clues about what she likes, discovering a chest full of pictures of a man named Jonah. Assuming he's a long-lost lover, Sprig takes it upon himself to find Jonah on Sadie's behalf, saying that he can take him straight to her for a reunion. When Jonah arrives and finally reunites with Sadie, he pulls out a crossbow and begins to attack her, with Sadie defending herself before having her pet spider disarm the guy. Sadie says that Jonah's just a guy who doesn't like her, and Sprig admits to the break-in, with Miss Croaker finally acknowledging Sprig's attempts are worth something, only for the kid to take this as full acceptance. Whether Anne acts mature and learns from earlier lessons or not really seems to change from writer to writer. I get that Amphibia is an episodic show in its first season with only light serialization, and it's not like characters unlearning lessons for plots to work is unheard of, but it starts to get confusing when I stop being able to tell if a character is actually growing, or if they've just learned the lesson of the week a bit sooner, and whether that's going to apply the next time Anne needs to be immature or Sprig has to be irresponsible to make a lesson work in the first place. Or whether previous episodes get contradicted versus these previous episodes just being old canon. Does Sprig really have no friends, or does Ivy not count? Are the Plantars outcasts, or does everyone love Sprig? Is Hop Pop considered weird, or do people all love his market stand? And how many times does Anne have to prove herself to Wartwood before they stop viewing her like a monster, or is the fact that they still treat her as such going to be thematically relevant later on? Diversions from serialized plots make it more difficult to believe the stakes of later seasons, as if the lessons the characters are learning don't matter. And then it becomes difficult to care as a viewer is unsure if what's going on will ever be referenced again, or if the status quo will just snap back to normal. A Night at the Inn. After confirming that the valley is still frozen shut, the planters head back, only for Bessie to have trouble as a storm comes in. They take shelter at the nearby Dandelion Inn, run by a couple of horned bullfrogs who offer them individual rooms as they're not very booked at the moment. Polly is upset because she isn't allowed her own room, having to share with Hop Pop. But she discovers there's an adjacent room and convinces him to let her sleep on her own, only for a few creepy things around the inn to keep her up. She investigates the other rooms, only to find none of her family around, and a hooded figure chasing her. Polly discovers the bullfrogs are planning to eat the planter family and rushes out of a laundry chute to save them by using her bow as a boomerang. After freeing her family, they run out of the inn, with Anne leaving behind leaky vinegar and baking soda to blow up the place. Polly discovers a snail trap on Bessie, and they free the other snails the bullfrogs have been capturing before returning home. Hop Pop, seeing how independent Polly was, offers her more freedom around the house, though she, as well as Sprig and Anne, just want to bunk with Hop Pop for the evening. Wally and Anne. While foraging with the planters, Anne sees a man made of moss, but no one else believes her. She insists that this moss man is real, though everybody else just compares her rambling behavior to One-Eyed Wally, that frog who originally called her a monster in the first episode. Wally believes her, saying he's seen the moss man himself, and he takes her on a journey to find this creature again, so they can take a photo for proof. Wally annoys Anne the entire way over, but also saves her from a fall and teaches her about not caring what others think of you. The two eventually make their way to the moss man's home, where Anne catches a glimpse of him. But as they're chasing after him, Wally begins to fall, and Anne chooses to save him over getting proof of Moss Man's existence. Wally reveals he never actually believed in the Moss Man, and only went along with Anne for fun, and the two return to Wartwood, both appearing crazy, but not caring. Sometimes Polly wants to be spoiled. Other times, she wants to be treated like less of a child. Her actual wants change depending on the plot of the week, but this doesn't necessarily mean that she's behaving in an inconsistent way. After all, people can want multiple things, even things that conflict. This is best explored during this episode, as Polly wants to have her own room, and get some independence from the family, the way that Sprig and Anne have with one another. But having this independence also means having the responsibility that comes with it. She realizes that she's scared by herself, and she can't simply go to Hop Pop for comfort without contradicting what she said she wanted. Ultimately, being treated like an adult means acting like an adult, though this is not an all-or-nothing sort of deal, as she manages to have the best of both worlds, recognizing when she can help out Bessie and save the family, or when even her older siblings decide they would rather share a bed with the family after a spooky night out. Anne learns from Wally that being weird isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's only a problem if you care deeply about how others view you more than you care about how you view yourself. Anne saw what she saw, and it's a matter of if she can find the beauty in seeing something rare versus only finding the beauty in sharing what she saw with others. It's like eating a nice meal so you can take a picture of it and put it online, versus eating a nice meal to enjoy the food. If anything, being treated like an outcast is a liberating feeling, as you can finally live authentically rather than constantly trying to live up to an expectation that is constantly shifting from person to person. Family fishing trip. The planters are going on their annual family fishing trip, where Sprig is excited to spend some quality time with Hop Pop. But Hop Pop has brought along Sylvia for the excursion, leaving Sprig alone for most of the boat ride as Anne is trying to parasail. Sprig tries a few things to sabotage the boat ride so Sylvia will leave, but none of these work, and he begins lamenting the lost time with his Hop Pop. Then he sees a giant crab poking out of the water and convinces Sylvia to swim out to it while pulling up the ladder behind her. But Hop Pop then offers to spend some time with Sprig like always, claiming Sylvia saw him sitting alone and requested it, and Sprig demands that they turn the boat around to go rescue her. He uses Anne's parasail to guide the way before pulling her away from the giant crab. Once everyone is safe, he apologizes for trying to get rid of Hop Pop's new lover and admits that he was jealous, as Anne asks them to go back to catch the crab for food. Bazaar. Sprig finds a ticket for the Bazaar in a tree hole while the planters are on their way back from the archives. Hop Pop forbids him and Anne from going, so they sneak out in the night, following a creature from inside the ticket to a spot in the woods full of mysterious stands. Anne finds a shop featuring markings similar to the one on her Calamity box, and they wait for it to open, though before she can show this off to Valeriana, the stand's owner, she's pickpocketed by another merchant who places Anne's backpack on his prize wall. She and Sprig have to race the reigning champion of the merchant's track, the Wrecker, to win it back, though they fail when they get hit by a blue shell near the finish line. The bizarre Bazaar ends, and the two lament that the music box is gone when the Wrecker returns, revealing himself as Hop Pop, and scolding them for sneaking out and getting into trouble. Anne agrees to leave the box with Hop Pop and to take her time with learning its secrets, and Hop Pop buries the Calamity box where no one else can find it. Ordinarily, Sprig has plots where he tries and fails to act more mature, and the narrative teaches him a lesson about acting less like a child. But this episode has an interesting inversion, in the sense that Sprig doesn't want to grow up, but instead wants to spend more time doing old-fashioned nostalgic stuff with Hop Pop. And this time, the narrative views his desires as understandable. In fact, there's not really a bad guy in this episode, as all three characters involved in the conflict have an understandable motivation. Sylvia just got there, and didn't understand the family's traditions or dynamics yet, and yet she was quickly able to catch on and give Sprig and Hop Pop the alone time they wanted. Hop Pop was just trying to entertain his new beau, while giving Sprig a bit of independence, only returning to the way things used to be when Sylvia gave him the okay. And Sprig just wanted to spend time with his family, only to realize that his family might soon include Sylvia as well. At the bazaar, Anne tries to rush the process of learning more about how to escape from the valley and get home, which makes sense as it's something the planters have also agreed to help with. But in trying too hard to get home, she's not only putting herself in dangerous situations, but others as well. I doubt this will be the last time Anne ends up doing something dangerous involving the Calamity box on her way home, and it's practically an inevitability that this ends up happening. So Hop Pop is in the right for now, but eventually his protectiveness might get in the way of Anne maturing. Cursed. Sprig is fretting over his engagement to Maddie, so he asks Anne to break up with her for him, something she does via a written message. While celebrating, they bump into Barry, the local candy merchant, who plays it off. The next morning, Sprig finds out that he's covered in hair, while Anne is sprouting feathers and squawking when she speaks, something that Hop Pop confirms is a curse. They assume it was Maddie who cursed them, and Sprig agrees to apologize, until Maddie herself arrives at the house, where Anne has to force him to do it. Maddie, in spite of being annoyed by the breakup message, says that she wasn't the one who cursed them, and agrees to help them track down the real culprit, revealed as Barry, who only pretends to be nice, as that's part of his brand. He refuses to undo the curse on Sprig and Anne, so Maddie fights him with magic of her own, eventually managing to undo the curse by flipping it onto Barry instead. Once transformed into a hairy bird, Barry agrees to trade a bunch of his candy to Maddie in exchange for the curse being undone, and she and Sprig leave on better terms. Fiddle me this. Wartilda tells Hop Pop that her daughter got into an academy in Newtopia, and realizing that vegetables haven't been selling as well as they used to, Hop Pop gets the idea from a poster for Amphibia's Got Talent to enter Sprig into this contest to show off his fiddle playing, hopefully to win him a sponsorship and a better life. He plans an act based off of moths and proceeds to train Sprig vigorously over the next several days, but Sprig just wanted to have fun and enjoy himself on stage. The day of the contest arrives, with the judges shooting bad acts into the sky. Sprig plays his routine in a shiny suit, and the audience is wowed, until a giant bat flies by thinking Sprig is a real moth, trying to eat him. Hop Pop has Anne launch him into the sky to catch up to the bat, where Polly then uses her bad singing to force it to drop them. Upon landing, Hop Pop apologizes, saying he only wanted Sprig to have a better life than he can provide, and Sprig says his life is fine, with the planters rejecting a touring offer. Sprig and Anne make one assumption about Maddie, that she's a cruel and spiteful person, and because of this, they end up in a position made worse by assuming the same thing a second time. The only reason they ever thought she was the one who cursed them was because they assumed that she would be the type to curse someone in the first place, The only reason they were in a position where they thought they might be cursed is because they were afraid of that at all. It wound up being the guy who actively played into stereotypes that he's too nice of a person to be mean who was actually mean, something that Sprig and Anne only ever managed to figure out as they spoke with someone who knew better than to make such assumptions. The family has had a financial struggle in the past, with an entire mini-arc in the middle of the first season all about this. Hop Pop knows that he's not providing for his grandchildren as well as he could, and so he tries to push Sprig to be able to provide for himself with his talent. But there are different ways to ensure your children or grandchildren are able to provide for themselves. Sure, you can push a kid into a stressful career that will make a lot of money, or you can provide them with a good enough home that they wind up with the work ethic and intelligence, emotional or otherwise, to wind up on their feet no matter where life takes them. And it's this latter one that Hop Pop is far more capable of providing. The Big Bugball Game. The Big Bugball Game is coming up. Think basketball. And when the frogs see how well Anne can shoot, they ask her to join the farmers team, so they have a chance against the townie team. Anne tries to convince the farmer team that their best bet to win is to pass the ball to her every time. But during a scrimmage against the townies, this strategy doesn't work as they exclusively cover her. The townies convince Anne to give passing a try, and their teamwork improves. On the day of the game, the townies are taken aback by their strategy of covering Anne not working, and the game winds up even. So Mayor Toadstool has Toady blind Anne with a powder to stop her from helping the team, but she's still able to navigate the field because they practiced this too. She misses the final shot, but Sprig's able to catch the rebound to win the game. Combat Camp. Hop Pop is going to a crop convention for the weekend and leaves the kids at daycare, something Anne resents as she thinks she's too old for this. This daycare is run by Tritonio, who, after Hop Pop leaves, reveals that he actually runs a combat camp for children. Tritonio teaches the kids to fight, though he singles out Anne for extra criticism, something that only makes her resent the situation more. Eventually, though, Tritonio gives Anne her own sword, while saying that he only singled her out because he saw the most potential in her, and this makes Anne's opinion of him shift around enough that she ignores that his next mission is for them to rob a train. Using a wounded orphan gambit to get on board, the trio successfully robs this train, only for Tritonio to trap them inside the cargo hold in a betrayal. Polly's able to blast their way out, and Anne winds up defeating him with the same techniques he taught her. In the end, Tritonio is arrested for running a fraudulent daycare, and Hop Pop returns, ragged from the convention. The Big Bugball Game is the sports episode, sort of an obligatory thing in a lot of kid shows, to the point where it gets parodied and parodied again until the tropes that are included genuinely and the ones that exist to make fun of the concept intertwine, and it becomes hard to tell which is which, or if that distinction even matters. When too many genre tropes are included in a story, they can get in one another's way. The narrative sets up that this will be a story about Anne learning teamwork, but it also establishes that Sprig gets overlooked on the team by Hop Pop and that he ought to have his own chance. But it's also Anne who makes the game-winning play by relying on her teammates for navigation rather than hoarding the ball, even though she's the one to shoot, and then Sprig comes back to make the actual point. The end to this episode is basically a trope pile-up, and it's difficult to tell which one was actually meant to be important. Anne resents teachers and those with a responsibility for or over her, reacting to being told what to do by doing it even less than before. This creates a feedback loop, where she resents strict teachers and reacts by being a bad student, so the teachers get more strict, which makes her push back harder. It's not until realizing that some people want to help others with lessons where she recontextualizes strictness as caring, and Anne is finally able to start taking combat camp more seriously. And then, they rob the train and all. Children of the Spore. When the kids break his model ship, Hop Pop goes to Loggles to get more glue, only for Anne and the rest to keep misbehaving. At the behest of a man named Apothecary Gary, he's given mushroom spores that will make them behave, and when they break the ship again, he decides to test them out. The spores work, and the rest of the planters proceed to sit perfectly still as ordered for the next day. Hop Pop applies the spores a second time, and the kids start growing mushrooms on their head, and they head for the door where Apothecary Gary reveals he's actually a mushroom who can control the body of his hosts, and he's controlling most of Wartwood. So Hop Pop runs away, luring them to the garage where Bessie is being kept, and breaking his model ship to free her, as Bessie loves to eat mushrooms. Bessie proceeds to eat all of the mushrooms, including Gary, and Wartwood is saved as Hop Pop apologizes for using brainwashing on the kids because they misbehaved. Before the credits roll, some of these spores proceed to infect Jeremy. Anne of the Year. Wartwood hosts its Frog of the Year contest, and Anne wins, earning the right/responsibility to host a giant party for the town of Wartwood. Mayor Toadstool's unsure if Anne deserves the role, and he casts doubt that her party will turn out alright. So Anne proceeds to push the town hard to make the best party ever, like Sprig to make a love confession to Ivy, convincing Hop Pop to do improv, and allowing Polly to play bouncer. The party arrives with the planned amount of spectacle, though things start going wrong when the planned entree begins to attack people and the entire party catches fire. Anne, realizing she doesn't deserve the title, decides to renounce it and focus on saving people from the inferno, taming the giant fish and teaming up with Toadstool to rescue the townsfolk. She saves everybody and apologizes, and Wartwood reveals they didn't vote for her based on her ability to throw a party, but on how much she has grown since arriving. Ivy confesses to Sprig, and Toady tells Anne there's someone waiting for her outside of town, Sasha. The two friends greet each other as Sasha mentions she's not alone, having an army of toads behind her. This episode begins setting up the first season's finale and the reunion between two of the three girls, reunion being the next episode's name. Thus far, Anne and Sasha's journeys have paralleled more than they think. While Sasha is showing up with an army of toads, Anne has an army of her own, just with a lot less rank and file, and more of a focus on unity. The people of Wartwood had finally learned to accept her, warts and all, as one of their own, and it's that warts and all version of acceptance that matters the most. Because if you claim to be on a person's side, but only like the best parts of that person, you don't really like them, you like what they can do for you. This is what Anne is expecting Wartwood to expect, so she puts on a lavish party to prove she's earned that acceptance. Except true acceptance is about a person's flaws as much as anything else, to like them not in spite of their problems or because of their problems, but in acceptance of these problems. This is the same way that Sasha was able to get the toads from the tower on her side. She complimented them not so much for their prowess in battle, but for the little things they do that make them unique. Both characters have attempted to weaponize acceptance, but only one of them is doing so with swords and armor. Reunion. The episode opens on a flashback. Sasha protects Anne from a bully, only to convince her to cut class and spend the day outside, as it's Anne's birthday. She even convinces Anne not to go back home for a family party, to instead head to the shop she stole the Calamity Box from. Back in the present, the toads under the command of Grime have stormed Wartwood, surrounding the people there as the planters escape to warn Anne about it. But Anne says it's fine as the toads are with her friend Sasha, and they need to trust her, which they begrudgingly do as Grime announces there's a party for all the frogs back at the tower. Anne sees how Sasha has been living, enthralled by the creature comforts, before learning the girl's plans. She wants to help stamp out a frog rebellion led by Hop Pop, so Grime and the toads will assist in getting her back home. As it turns out, Wartwood refusing to pay their taxes and Hop Pop running for mayor have been construed as rebellion, and Hop Pop has become a symbol of sorts. Anne tries to warn the frogs at the banquet, who have already figured out something is wrong, and they plot an escape through the sewers with Wally planting explosives the whole way. But they get caught anyway and are brought to the top of the tower for Hop Pop's execution, only for Anne to finally stand up to Sasha as she attacked her former friend. Anne wins this fight, though Grime prepares to execute Hop Pop anyway, until the explosives go off and the tower begins to fall. Sasha's about to fall from the tower, but Anne saves her, yet even with the rest of the planters holding her up, she's still only dragging them down. So Sasha lets go to save the others as the planters make their escape, only getting saved by Grime leaping up to save Sasha. The citizens of Wartwood return home as Anne is thankful to be with her real friends. This is the episode where Anne stands up to Sasha, not because it's the point at which she finally works up the courage to do so, but because it's the point where she first realized that she needed to stand up to her friend in the first place. The easiest way to get taken advantage of is not knowing what it looks like when you're being taken advantage of, and this relationship between Anne and Sasha parallels the treatment of the frogs by the Toad army, occupying their homes as though they were a hostile army. The frogs never fought back against the toads because the frogs didn't realize they could fight back against the toads. So Grime and Sasha both understand the danger in allowing someone to resist, even in a symbolic manner. Hop Hop ran against Toadstool and lost, but he still ran. The fact that he opposed the existing order at all is what convinced the rest of the world that opposing the order was doable, and that fighting back could lead to victories. And however small these victories were, they left the door open for greater wins down the line. But it's not just learning that you can fight back that has to be taught, but that there's even something to fight for in the first place. The frogs in Wartwood were happy in their lives, accepting the oppression at the hands of the toads as an inevitability, just as Anne accepted the fact that Sasha was her friend as natural. She didn't have a frame of reference for what friendship was supposed to look like before arriving in Amphibia, and meeting the Plantar family and the rest of the frogs. And once she realized what friendship was supposed to be like, she realized that that was not what she had with Sasha. Season 1 Retrospective. The first season of Amphibia is done, and one of Anne's main goals has been finished, while the other is further away than before. And with a bit of irony, the further goal is the one she is okay being away from, while the goal she achieved was something negative. Anne wanted to reunite with her friends and was able to find Sasha after 3 months, only to realize that Sasha was never really her friend, and she had a much better relationship with the frogs of Wartwood. Her other goal of getting home is further away, as yet another potential avenue of escape was found to be not worth the cost. And yet staying in Amphibia even longer is not such a high price to pay, again, because of the new family she's found in the Plantars. Structurally, the first season comes across as a series of loosely connected plots that can be watched in just about any order, which, although I'm not going to check until after finishing the video so the React part of the title still makes more sense, I would have to assume this comes from a desire by executives to only air a show that can be rerun on TV for general audiences who only need to loosely understand what's going on. But in a less marketing executive sort of thinking, this is also a way to introduce characters and get the audience to sympathize with their wants and such before raising stakes later on. It's harder to care about the fate of a bunch of strangers than it is to care about a bunch of people we've seen living regular, normal lives. These regular, normal lives are what's at stake every time some plot development occurs, after all. So whether the slow pace was intentional or an affordance to get airtime, or some combination of the two, it still serves the overall narrative, not by adding to it, but by reinforcing that these stakes matter. This is the major difference between Anne and Sasha's motivations by this point. Anne has gotten to know the Plantars and so many others that she cares about, whether or not Amphibia is destroyed. Sasha doesn't care what happens because she's planning to leave anyway. And this is mirrored by their conflict, as Sasha gets what she wants by being nice, whereas Anne has been acting nice for the sake of acting nice. It's worth comparing end results, like how Anne defended Wartwood against the Toads, despite the fact that they hadn't really accepted her, and she assumed they'd continue to not accept her even after she stood up for them, versus the fact that Sasha stood up for the Toads only because she assumed she would be getting something in return from it. Likewise, Anne hung out with Sasha that day 3 months ago because she believed the two of them to be friends, whereas Sasha hung out with Anne because she wanted an enabler to justify her actions. Both girls act nice, but truly nice people don't do nice things because they want something in return, be it a way home or a person to go home with.